They thought she was just the janitor. Emma walked into the prestigious Rosewood Symphony Hall wearing a simple cotton dress, old sneakers, and carrying a scuffed violin case. No makeup, no entourage, no designer name tag, just calm eyes and quiet steps. Around her, young musicians in tailored tuxedos and flowing gowns glanced her way, and dismissed her without a second thought. One of them, a world-renowned violinist known for his arrogance as much as his skill, looked her up and down and smirked. "People like you don't belong here," he said loud enough for others to hear. Laughter followed. He handed her a battered student violin, as a joke, and challenged her to play something real. Then, with a mocking grin, he picked the hardest piece in the repertoire, Paganini's Caprice No. 24, a piece known to humble even the best. He had no idea who she really was. They gave her a violin that hadn't been tuned in years. The strings were worn, the bow, crooked and splintered at the edge. One of the students chuckled. "Let's see what Grandma can do." Laughter rippled through the concert hall like cold wind. Phones were pulled out. TikToks were already being recorded. One girl whispered, "This'll go viral by dinner." Emma didn't flinch. She held the violin with both hands, gently. Like it meant something. Like it was more than a prank. Like it was part of her. But the crowd didn't see that. They saw a woman in her 40s wearing Payless shoes. A worn linen dress you could get off a clearance rack at Target. No flashy resume. No assistant. No name they recognized. She was just simple. And in their eyes, that meant unworthy. The elite violinist who had mocked her earlier leaned in and said, loud enough for the mic to catch, "When you mess up, and you will, just hand the violin back and leave quietly." He grinned like he'd already won. The audience laughed again. It wasn't just a room full of music students, it was a room full of gatekeepers. People who believed talent had to come with a pedigree, a private tutor, a name carved on a marble wall somewhere. People who wore their legacy like a badge and used it as a weapon. And there was Emma, standing alone under the spotlight with a dusty violin and 1,000 eyes waiting for her to fail. Someone in the back muttered, "Why are we even wasting time?" A young man on the front row typed into the live stream, "This is embarrassing. She's gonna break the bow." And just like that, 10,000 strangers were now watching, to laugh. But Emma? She wasn't there to entertain their cruelty. She closed her eyes, took one deep breath, and placed the bow on the string. And that's where we'll pause for now. Because before we talk about what happened next, before the first note changed everything, I just want to ask you something. Have you ever been judged before you even opened your mouth? Have you ever walked into a room and felt small, just because of how you looked, what you wore, or where you came from? If you're still with me right now, if you're still listening to Emma's story, comment the number 1 below. That's it, just a number, just a way to let me know you're here, and you see her too. Because the next part, you won't forget it. The bow touched the string, and the world shifted. It began not with fire, but with restraint, a single note, stretched so delicately it trembled in the air. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it held power. The kind of power that made people sit up straight without realizing it. The kind of sound that doesn't come from fingers, but from memory. From pain. From decades of love and discipline no one else sees. Emma drew the next few notes slowly, gracefully, and then, suddenly, the tempo climbed. Paganini's Caprice No. 24. A piece so feared in the violin world it's often reserved for grand finales. Began to unfold. And not just unfold, it soared. She danced through the theme with effortless clarity. Each variation came like a wave, crashing over the crowd's disbelief. Double stops, harmonics, bow ricochets, left-hand pizzicato, the kind of things students practice for years just to survive. Emma didn't survive it, she commanded it. The room, just moments ago filled with mockery, was now silent. Not polite silent, stunned silent, mouths parted, eyes wide, fingers still frozen over phone screens. They didn't know what they were seeing. Or maybe, they were finally seeing her for the first time. Even the elite violinist, the man who had handed her the worn-out instrument like it was a joke, stood perfectly still, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched, like he was trying to hold back something he didn't understand. Regret? Shame? Awe? He'd spent his whole life believing skill looked a certain way. dressed a certain way, walked, talked, and boasted a certain way. And yet, here was Emma, dressed in simplicity, carrying no name badge, speaking only through sound, and suddenly, his trophies didn't seem so shiny anymore. Let's take you back, just for a moment. Years ago, Emma wasn't some quiet stranger in a church basement. She was a rising star. She'd been handpicked by Maestro Adrian Keller, the most reclusive and respected violinist of the 20th century. The man who performed with Leonard Bernstein. The man who declined the Grammys 3 years in a row. The man who, at the height of his fame, said he was done teaching until he met her. She was just 19. He saw something no one else did. Not just talent, but grace, restraint, heart. For a decade, Emma trained under him, privately. Without fanfare, no recordings, no press. Just music, pure and sacred. And then, when Keller passed away, Emma disappeared from the public eye. Some said she gave up. Others said she burned out. The truth? She walked away. She couldn't bear what the industry had become, how it turned art into competition, music into politics, performance into vanity. So she left, moved to a small town, taught music to kids in libraries, rec centers, and after-school programs, played for nursing homes, weddings, sunrises, until this moment, until today, when someone looked her in the face and said, "People like you don't belong here," until they handed her a broken bow and laughed, until they pointed phones at her, ready to watch her fall. But instead, they watched her rise. Back in the hall, Emma moved through the last variation of the piece. Her right hand blurred with bow speed. Her left fingers blurred with dizzying agility. Every note struck with precision so crisp. It was surgical. She hit the final run, an ascending blaze of arpeggios, and then silence. That final note hung like fog, then dissolved into breath. No one moved, not even the lights. Emma stood still, her chest rising and falling, not from exhaustion, but from release, as if something inside her had finally spoken again after years of silence. And then, just as gently as she began, she lowered the violin. She didn't bow, she didn't smirk, she simply looked out into the crowd, her voice soft but unwavering, and said, "Maestro Keller taught me that music was never meant to impress the proud. It was meant to lift the broken. So no, I didn't come here to prove anything. I came here to remind you what music sounds like when it's free." Then she turned and walked off stage. Not a single person in the audience dared to clap right away. It would have felt like clapping at a funeral, or in a cathedral. Even the most arrogant students, some with full scholarships, international medals, portfolios of performances, just sat there, humbled. Phones buzzed quietly. The live stream chat was flooding now. But not with jokes anymore. Who is she? Was that real? I've never heard anything like that. And somewhere in the chaos, one anonymous viewer left a comment that said simply, "Greatness doesn't wear a name tag." When Emma stepped off that stage, the silence lingered. It wasn't the kind of silence you get after a good performance. It was the kind that wraps around the soul and holds you still. A sacred, stunned kind of stillness, like the world just realized it had missed something extraordinary. For a few long seconds, no one moved, no one even dared to breathe too loud. And then it started. Not a roar, not chaos, just the sound of one person standing, then another, and another, until every single person in the hall, those who had laughed, mocked, filmed, and whispered, rose to their feet in solemn awe. Applause came slowly, hesitantly, as if no one was quite sure how to honor what they had just seen. Because what Emma had given them wasn't just a masterclass in technique. She had given them truth, stripped bare of ego, stripped of presentation, stripped of everything the world says you need to be elite. She had reminded them of what music was before fame, before press releases, before ivory towers and expensive conservatories. She brought them back to the core of it all, the reason behind every note. And yet she never looked back. She walked off stage as quietly as she came in. No bow, no triumphant glance, no camera crew waiting. She just disappeared into the hallway, violin case in hand, like a passing shadow. Behind her, the fallout began. The elite violinist, the one who had mocked her, handed her the broken instrument, and laughed the loudest, was left exposed. He tried to recover, but it was too late. The videos had already gone viral. Not the mocking clips people had hoped would trend, but the performance, the silence, the standing ovation, her final words about Maestro Keller. By the end of the day, news of Emma's performance spread across the country. People were calling it a moment of truth, a reckoning, a wake-up call. The conservatory launched an emergency review. Within 48 hours, the school released a public apology, not just a short PR statement, but a full acknowledgement of their failure to foster inclusion, humility, and open-mindedness in their space. The violinist who mocked her was suspended indefinitely for conduct unbecoming of an educator. Several faculty members who had remained silent during the humiliation were called into accountability meetings. The school invited Emma to return, not as a student, but as a visiting master, an honored guest, a role model, but Emma declined. While the world buzzed, she had already returned home, back to her quiet life, back to her small studio in the corner of a community center where the floor still creaked and the walls smelled faintly of old wood and sheet music. There, a group of kids sat in a half-circle around her, some holding second-hand violins, others still struggling with the basics. They didn't ask about her viral fame. They didn't care about headlines. They just wanted to know how to hold the bow correctly. Emma smiled. That's where she belonged. But the moment had sparked something in her, and she knew she couldn't let it end in applause alone. So she made a phone call. Then another. And then she announced the launch of something new. The Keller Quiet Legacy Fund. Named after her late mentor. The fund would sponsor full scholarships for underprivileged students who showed passion, perseverance, and heart, regardless of background, attire, or status. Tuition, instruments, lessons, travel, all covered. But more than that, Emma insisted that every recipient be paired with a mentor who didn't just teach, but listened, who didn't just instruct, but believed. And the first scholarship? It went to the very same young man who had handed her that dusty, broken violin on the concert stage. Not out of spite, not to prove a point, but because Emma believed in redemption. 2. I saw fear in his eyes the moment I started playing, she said quietly in an interview. But more than that, I saw regret. And if we want the world to change, we can't just punish the ones who mock. We have to teach them how to see again. Today, the chair Emma once sat in during that infamous rehearsal still stands on stage at the Rosewood Conservatory. Only now, it bears a brass plaque. It reads, "Reserved for the unseen, the unheard, and the underestimated, let them play, and no one dares to sit in it lightly." Emma didn't need their medals. She didn't need their spotlight. What she needed, what she gave, was far more powerful. A reminder that greatness can come in worn shoes. That genius doesn't always introduce itself. That sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one holding the storm inside. She didn't just play a piece. She played a mirror to all of us. And in doing so, she left behind something far more lasting than applause. She left grace. She never returned to that stage. Not because she wasn't invited. Not because she couldn't. But because Emma understood something most people spend their whole lives chasing and never quite find. She understood that the spotlight was never the point. For weeks after the performance, her name lived in headlines. Articles called her the hidden virtuoso, the quiet storm, the woman who silenced the room. Offers poured in, TV interviews, honorary degrees, concert tours across Europe, even a book deal. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who had redefined what excellence looked like. And Emma? She was back in her community center, guiding a 9-year-old boy's fingers on a violin string, showing him how to feel the resonance instead of forcing the sound. The same reporter who had begged for a sit-down interview finally showed up one afternoon, camera crew and all. He asked her, point blank, why she turned everything down. Emma smiled. Because fame echoes, but legacy whispers. He didn't quite understand what she meant, but her students did. One of them, Ava, 12 years old, quiet and bright-eyed, later said, "Miss Emma teaches us how to make the music feel like breathing. Not like performing, like telling the truth." That was her gift. Not just the ability to play the violin better than anyone else in the room, but the ability to see the room, to know who had been told they weren't enough, who had been handed broken instruments in life, laughed at, underestimated, pushed aside. She never gave them speeches. She gave them permission to show up, to try, to make mistakes, to sound like themselves. And slowly, it spread. The Keller Quiet Legacy Fund received thousands of letters. Not just from hopeful students, but from teachers, retired musicians, parents, even former critics. One letter came from a violinist in his 60s who had once studied in Europe. He wrote, "I used to believe greatness had to be earned through suffering, through status, through hierarchy, but I watched that performance. And I realized something. Greatness isn't inherited, it's carried, quietly, and you reminded us how to carry it with grace." Emma never posted about the fund, never appeared in a press release. She let the work speak. And the work did speak. Within a year, 4 new students were playing on scholarship, each from a background that would have once shut them out. A 5th recipient was deaf in one ear, but had a way of feeling rhythm through touch that astonished even professional instructors. Emma sat with every one of them. She never called herself their mentor, just their listener. One day, after a small recital held in a local church, a woman in the audience stood up and said, "You should have your own school." Emma looked up. "I don't want to build walls around what I love. I want to open doors." She never built an academy. But something bigger happened instead. She changed the culture. At conservatories across the country, chairs started appearing on stages with small metal plaques, reserved for the unseen, the unheard, the underestimated. Music programs expanded outreach. Juries became more blind. Scholarships began looking not just at resumes, but at resilience. And everywhere her story spread, so did something else. Humility, respect, the quiet knowing that you never know who someone is just by looking at them. And then came one final performance. Not at Carnegie Hall, not on any stage at all. It was a late summer afternoon. The sun cast golden light through the dusty windows of her community center. The chairs were misaligned, the air conditioning wasn't working, and yet, the room was full. Former students, neighbors, a few reporters who had managed to keep quiet enough to be invited. In the center stood Emma, not with her concert violin, but the same battered student one they had handed her that day. She played a piece no one recognized at first. Slow, tender, full of pauses. It wasn't until halfway through that people began to realize what it was. Paganini's Caprice No. 24. But rewritten, softened, played not as a challenge, but as a lullaby. By the time she finished, more than a few in the room were wiping their eyes. And when they asked her afterward what she would call that arrangement, she said simply, "For those who were never given the chance to speak first." That was Emma's final performance. And it didn't end with applause. It ended with silence. The kind of silence that feels like understanding. The kind of silence that says, "We see you now." She didn't need the spotlight. She was the light. And maybe that's the message we take with us. Not just to never judge by appearance. Not just to stay humble. But to remember that sometimes, the greatest voice in the room is the one that waited the longest to be heard. So if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been handed the broken bow and told, "People like you don't belong here," know this: Emma belonged. And so do you. If you're still here, if Emma's story has stayed with you this far, type 1 in the comments. That's all. Just a simple one. To say I'm still listening. I see her too. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong, just because of how you looked? Where you came from, or what you didn't have? Emma's story wasn't just about music. It was about dignity, about quiet strength, about the power of showing up with nothing but the truth, and letting that be enough. They judged her before she played a single note. They handed her a broken violin and expected failure. But what she gave them was something unforgettable. Not just a flawless performance, but a reminder. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to speak from who you truly are. Emma didn't seek revenge. She built something better. She gave back. She uplifted others. She showed us that grace doesn't come from applause, it comes from purpose. And maybe that's the real message we all need to take with us. Don't underestimate someone just because they don't look the part. Don't let the world define your worth by your background, your clothes, or the silence you carry. Because sometimes, the person you overlook is the one who will teach you what greatness really looks like. If this story touched you, if you saw a part of yourself in Emma, or in the silence that followed her final note, I want to invite you to do something simple. Leave a comment below. Tell me how this story made you feel. Tell me if you've ever been in Emma's shoes. Or just write one word that captures what this story means to you. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like more stories that stay with you long after the video ends, stories that speak to the heart, consider subscribing. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind us that we are more than what the world sees. And that we were never invisible to begin with. I'm listening, and I'd love to hear what's on your heart.